I showed up to my sister's wedding in a dress I'd had altered twice, holding a card with my name on the envelope, and the seating chart didn't have me on it. Not at the head table, not at table 4 with the cousins. They'd put me at a two-top jammed against the swinging kitchen door, the one labeled in the planner's neat handwriting as vendor overflow, next to the DJ's equipment cases and a folded high chair nobody was using. I paid for that wedding. $38,000 of it, give or take. The venue and the catering and the dress my sister cried over in the boutique. And when I found the little card with my name printed in gold and set it down by the salt shaker at the staff table, my sister came over in her gown, leaned down so her perfume hit me before her words did, and laughed. "We figured you'd be more comfortable back here," she said. "You're basically staff anyway. You're always working." That was the night I stopped pretending it was an accident. They'd taken out a loan in my name, opened a card I never signed for, rewritten our grandmother's trust so I disappeared from it, and they were still, even then, planning to hand me the rest of the catering bill. I used to think I was the dependable one. By the end of that night, I understood I was just the one nobody expected to read the fine print. Stay with me, because the part where I finally did read it is the part that mattered. Let me back up. I'm a hospice nurse. I've been one for 9 years, which means I've held more hands at the end than I can count, and it means I'm tired in a specific way most people don't recognize. I work nights a lot. I miss things. Birthdays, group texts, the slow drift of who's mad at who. That tiredness is the soft spot my family found, and they pressed on it for years before I noticed the bruise. When my sister got engaged, I offered to help with the wedding. I want to be honest about that. Nobody held a gun to me. She cried in the kitchen about how her fiancé's family had money and ours didn't, how she didn't want to look small, and I said the thing I always said, which was, "Don't worry, I've got it." I had savings. I lived simply. I'd been putting money away for a house I kept not buying because something always came up, and the something was usually them. So I paid the deposit on the venue, this restored cotton warehouse outside Charleston with brick walls and string lights. I paid the caterer. I co-signed nothing, or so I believed. I wrote checks and tapped my card and told myself this was love, that this was what a good big sister did. The first crack showed up 3 weeks before the wedding, and I almost missed it the way I miss everything. I was sitting in my car in a patient's driveway at 2 in the morning, waiting for the on-call doctor to call me back. And my phone buzzed with a fraud alert from a bank I don't bank with. A new card, a store credit line at a bridal retailer, had a balance of $4,000 and a payment past due. I figured it was a scam text. I almost deleted it. Then I read the name on the account. It was mine. Spelled right. My actual middle initial. I didn't panic. People assume that's a flex, but it isn't. When you've watched families fall apart in waiting rooms, you learn that panic is just grief that hasn't organized itself yet. I sat in that driveway and I got very, very quiet. Then I drove home and I started writing things down. That's the part I want you to understand about me. I don't yell, I make lists. I opened a blank document on my laptop at 3 in the morning and I titled it, plainly, "What is actually happening?" And I started with the store card. Then I called the bank's fraud line, the real one, not the number from the text, and I sat on hold for 40 minutes listening to the same 8 bars of saxophone, and a man named in another life would have made me laugh, but instead I just answered his questions. When was the account opened? Did I recognize the shipping address? I did recognize it. It was my mother's house, the brick ranch I grew up in, with the wind chime I'd hung myself. I froze the card that night. I want to say that clearly, because later, when people heard my story, the first thing they asked was why I didn't lock everything down immediately. I did. The same night I learned about the first account, I called the credit bureaus and put a freeze on my file. I changed every password. I ordered my full credit report. I did the smart thing fast, and I'm telling you that because I need you to know I wasn't a fool. I was just a daughter who'd been taught that the people who raised me would never aim at me on purpose. The credit report came back the next morning, and it was worse than the store card. There was a personal loan, $25,000, originated 4 months earlier from an online lender I'd never heard of. The stated purpose in the lender's own drop-down menu was special event expenses. The funds had been deposited into an account ending in 4 digits that weren't mine. They were my sister's. I knew them because I'd Venmo'd her rent enough times to have them memorized. So there it was. I had paid for the wedding with my own money, openly, with checks I signed. And separately, secretly, they had borrowed $25,000 more in my name to cover the honeymoon and whatever else, and dropped it straight into my sister's account, and were trusting that I'd never look. I made tea. I know how that sounds. But I needed my hands to do something gentle while my brain did something hard. I stood in my kitchen and let the kettle tick, and I thought about every time in the last 2 years my mother had said the words, "You've always been so independent." And I realized she hadn't been complimenting me. She'd been narrating. She'd been building a version of me for an audience in which I was so capable and so distant that nobody would think to check on what was being done to me. The independent one. The one who didn't need anything. The one who was basically staff. I should tell you about my grandmother now because she's the reason this stopped being about money. My grandmother raised me as much as my mother did. When my dad left, my grandmother was the one who showed up. She's 86 now. Sharp on her good days, foggy on the bad ones. And for the last 2 years, I'd been the one driving across town to take her to appointments, refill her pillbox, sit with her while she told the same 3 stories about the textile mill where she met my grandfather. My mother and sister visited her like tourists. They came for holidays and photos and left before the dishes. 2 days after I found the loan, while I was already deep in folders and screenshots and a spreadsheet I'd titled Timeline, my brother texted me. I haven't mentioned my brother yet because he and I weren't close, not because of any fight, just the ordinary drift of adults who never figured out what to say to each other. His text said, "Hey, can we talk?" And then, before I could answer, a second one, "There's stuff about Grandma's accounts you should probably see." I called him. He didn't pick up. He texted, "Can't talk right now, I'm at work, but can we get coffee tomorrow?" And I sat there holding the phone with that specific dread you get when someone tells you there's more, when you already thought you'd reached the bottom and the floor opens up anyway. I didn't sleep. I went back to my laptop instead, and I started pulling at a thread I'd been avoiding. My grandmother had a trust. I knew that much. My grandfather set it up before he died, and the whole point of it, the thing my grandmother told me 100 times, was that the house would go to whoever took care of her. "The house goes to the one who stays," she used to say, patting my hand. "And that's you, baby." I'd always waved it off. I didn't want her house. I wanted her. But that night I dug through my email, because I'm the kind of person who never deletes anything, and I found a message from 2 years back from the family's estate attorney. I'd been copied on it, I think, by accident, the way you sometimes get pulled into a thread and then forgotten. The subject line was about a trust amendment for review. I'd never opened it. 2 years ago, I'd been on a stretch of nights where 4 of my patients died in 1 week, and I wasn't opening anything that wasn't from a doctor. I opened it now. It was a revised version of my grandmother's trust, and where the original had me named, clearly as the inheritor of the house and a third of everything else, this version had my name nowhere, not in the house clause, not in the residual. Nowhere. My sister was named as the sole beneficiary of the entire estate, with my mother as successor trustee, meaning my mother controlled everything while my grandmother was still alive. And on the last page was a signature line with my grandmother's name, signed in handwriting that almost looked right. Almost. My grandmother's hands shake. They've shaken for years. Her real signature wanders off the line, the letters fat and trembling. This signature was steady, confident. The signature of someone who could see well and hold a pen still, which my grandmother hasn't been able to do since before the amendment was dated. And there was something else, a smaller thing that turned out to be the largest thing. Attached to the trust amendment was a power of attorney, a document giving my mother full authority over my grandmother's finances, her bank accounts, her medical decisions, dated the same week. Witnessed and notarized, and there, on the witness line, was my name. My signature, claiming I'd been present, claiming I'd watched my grandmother sign away her own autonomy to my mother. I stared at the date on that power of attorney for a long time, because I knew exactly where I'd been that day. I keep a work calendar, a real one, with patient initials and times, the kind you have to keep when you're documenting controlled substances. On the date that document claimed I was standing in an attorney's office in Charleston watching my grandmother sign, I had been 90 miles away, sitting on the edge of a hospital bed in a town near the Georgia line, holding the hand of a man named only by his initials in my notes, while he died at 4:40 in the afternoon. I had the chart. I had the time of death I'd written myself. I had a co-signing nurse and a doctor's signature and a facility's records. They'd forged me into a room I could prove I was never in. That's when it stopped being grief and started being something with edges. I met my brother for coffee the next morning at a place near the harbor, the kind with too many succulents and a chalkboard menu nobody reads. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight. He kept turning his cup in circles on the table. I didn't do any of it, he said before I'd even sat down. I want you to know that first. Okay, I said, but I knew. He couldn't look at me. I knew about the loan. I heard them talking about it at Thanksgiving. Mom said you'd never check, that you were too busy, that even if you found out you'd just pay it because you always pay everything, and I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. He finally looked up, and then last month I went over to help Grandma with her TV, and she didn't know who I was for the first 10 minutes. And when she came back, she started crying and said, "Your mother won't let me call you." Said Mom changed her phone, put a passcode on it, screens her calls now. She thinks you abandoned her. They told her you don't want to see her anymore. I set my coffee down very carefully so I wouldn't drop it. For 2 years, I had been driving across town every week, and for some of those weeks, apparently, I'd been driving to a woman who'd been told I'd stopped loving her, who probably cried after I left because she couldn't square the daughter at her kitchen table with the story she was being fed when I wasn't there. "There's more," my brother said. He took out his phone. "Grandma's bank account. I have view access. Grandpa set it up years ago. Nobody ever took me off." He turned the screen toward me. "Look at the last 6 months. Withdrawals, cash withdrawals, 300 here, 500 there, twice a week, every week. A transfer of $9,000 to a home renovation contractor that, when I looked it up later, was a shell with my sister's married name to be on the registration. A check made out to the wedding venue. My grandmother's retirement, the money my grandfather worked 40 years in a mill to leave her, drained slow and steady like a tub with a cracked stopper. They weren't just stealing from me. They were stealing from an 86-year-old woman who thought she'd been abandoned by the only person who'd actually stayed. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't. Not the hot kind. What I felt was cold and clarifying, like stepping out of a stuffy room into November air. Everything got very sharp. I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew the order. I did not confront them. Not yet. That's the mistake people want you to make. The dramatic mistake. The one where you show up and scream and they get to call you unstable. I'd watched my mother prime that gun for years. So instead, I went home and I built a case the way I chart a patient, dated, sourced, undeniable. I reported the identity theft to the FTC and got a case number. I filed police reports for the loan and the card. I contacted the lender and the bank with my fraud documentation and my work calendar proving I couldn't have opened those accounts where they were opened. I got a copy of my grandmother's original trust from the county where my grandfather had filed it, the real one, the one with my name in it. I pulled the death record from the day of the forged power of attorney and matched it to my employment file. I made copies of everything 3 times, and I put one set in a fireproof box, one with my brother and one in a safe deposit box at a bank none of them knew I used. And then I made a phone call I'd been turning over in my head for 2 days. I called Adult Protective Services, and I reported suspected financial exploitation of an elderly dependent. I gave them the account records my brother shared. I gave them the timeline. The intake worker, a calm woman who asked the right questions in the right order, told me they'd take these very seriously and that someone would visit my grandmother within 72 hours. That part wasn't revenge. I need you to hear that. That part was the only thing that ever really mattered. 2 days later, the retaliation came, exactly the way I'd known it would. I got an email at work, forwarded by my supervisor, about an anonymous complaint filed with the state nursing board. The complaint alleged that I was exhibiting signs of burnout and possible substance diversion and suggested the board review my access to controlled medications. It was vague enough to be deniable and specific enough to threaten the only thing in my life they hadn't already touched. My license. My 9 years. My ability to do the one thing I'm good at. My supervisor watched me read it. She's known me a long time. I have to forward this, she said. You know I do. But I want you to know I think it's garbage. She paused. Do you know who filed it? Yeah, I said. I do. Because of course I did. My mother had done the exact same thing to me 5 years earlier when I'd started asking too many questions about why my grandmother's bills weren't getting paid even though there was money. Back then, it had been a phone call to my old job, a worried mother performance about how I'd been under so much stress. I'd believed she was trying to help. I'd thanked her. I'd actually thanked her. This time I didn't get embarrassed. I got organized. I gathered 5 years of clean drug screens, my pristine documentation record, letters from 3 physicians I worked with, and my attendance file, and I submitted them to the board myself before they even opened an investigation, with a cover letter noting that the timing of the anonymous complaint coincided precisely with my report of family financial fraud, and that I had filed the relevant police reports, which I attached. The board closed the matter in under 3 weeks. But I keep that complaint in my files. It's the cleanest evidence of who they are that I own. The Adult Protective Services investigator visited my grandmother on a Tuesday. By Thursday, with the bank records and the forged documents and the original trust all in front of the right people, a judge granted an emergency order suspending my mother's power of attorney pending investigation. The forged signature on the trust amendment got referred to the district attorney. The forged power of attorney with my name on it. The one that put me in a room I could prove with a dead man's chart I was nowhere near, became the centerpiece, because forgery is hard to wave away when the person you forged has a hospital's records placing them at a deathbed at the exact hour. And then, only then, after the law was already in motion and there was nothing left for them to spin, I went to the house. I didn't call ahead. I drove to the brick ranch with the wind chime, and I let myself in. And my mother was at the kitchen table with my sister and a wedding album, the two of them laughing over photos from the day I'd paid for and been seated next to the high chair. Oh, my mother said, and her face did 3 things in a second and landed on warmth. Honey, we've been worried about you. No, you haven't, I said. I set a folder on the table. Not slammed. Set. The same way I set down a chart at the end of a shift. This is everything I've ever paid for, I said. The wedding, the deposits, the catering, the dress. I turned a page. And this is the $25,000 loan you took out in my name and put in her account. Another page. And this is the credit card. Another. And this is Grandma's real trust, the one where I'm in it, next to the fake one where I'm not, with the signature that doesn't shake even though her hands haven't been steady in 3 years. My sister stood up. You're unbelievable, making this about you on. And this, I said, and I laid down the last page, the one I'd saved, is the power of attorney you forged with my signature on it, the one that says I watched Grandma sign away her own money to Mom on a Wednesday afternoon. I looked at my mother when I said the next part. I was at a man's deathbed that afternoon, 90 miles away. I have the chart. I have his time of death in my own handwriting. So either I can be in 2 places at once, or you put my name on a felony. The kitchen got very quiet. The kind of quiet I knew well. The kind that comes right before a family finally tells the truth, or right before it doesn't. My mother tried the old key and the old lock. Whatever you think you found, you've twisted it. You've always been dramatic. We can talk about this like adults if you just calm down. I'm the calmest person in this room, I said, and I was. I'm not here to talk. APS already has the bank records. The DA already has the trust. The board already cleared me, by the way, since you're wondering whether that complaint worked. I watched her flinch. It didn't. You'd put your own mother in jail, she said, and her voice cracked into the wounded register, the one that used to work. Over money. No, I said. Over Grandma. You told her I left her. You changed her phone. You let her cry herself to sleep, thinking I didn't love her while you drained her accounts to pay for a wedding I was already paying for. The money I don't even care about. The money I'll get back or I won't. But you made an 86-year-old woman grieve a granddaughter who was driving across town every single week to sit with her. That's the part there's no folder big enough for. My sister said, fast and ugly. She gave it to us. She wanted to. She doesn't even know what year it is half the time, I said. That's the whole point. That's what financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult means. There's a statute. There's a number. It's in the folder. I picked the folder back up because they didn't deserve to keep a copy, and I walked to the door. At the door, I turned around the way you do when you've decided to leave a door closed for good, and you want one clean look first. There's an invoice in there too, I said. Everything I spent, every dollar. Going forward, if you want me to pay for something, it comes with a contract and a due date, like it would for any stranger, because that's what we are now. I let that sit. And I'm taking Grandma. The court's letting me. So you can keep the album. I drove straight from there to my grandmother's apartment, the assisted living place my mother had moved her into the year before. The one I'd been told had a new visitor policy that always seemed to keep me out. The front desk had me on a list now, a different list, the right one. I went up to her room and knocked, and she was sitting by the window in the afternoon light, and she looked up at me with her cloudy eyes, and for a terrible second I thought she wouldn't know me. Then she did. "There's my girl," she said, and started to cry. "They told me you didn't want me anymore." I sat on the edge of her bed and held her shaking hands in mine, and I said, "I never stopped coming, Grandma. They just stopped telling you." And she cried, and I cried, and neither of us said anything else for a long time, and it was the first time I'd cried in the whole thing because the money had never made me cry, but that did. The legal part took the better part of a year. My mother took a plea on the financial exploitation and the forgery, which kept her out of prison but put a felony on her record and a restitution order on her future. The trust amendment was voided and the original restored. The loan and the card got wiped from my name once the fraud was proven, my clean reports doing exactly what clean reports do. My sister's marriage, I heard secondhand, didn't survive the discovery that her honeymoon was bought with stolen money and a forged signature, though I didn't ask and don't think about it much. I never collected the restitution. I want to be honest about that because people always ask. The court ordered it and I let it sit. I didn't want money that required me to keep a connection open, a payment plan that tethered me to them every month for years. I wanted the connection closed more than I wanted to be made whole. There's a kind of payment that costs more to receive than to forgive, and that was it. I let it go. Not for them, for me. My grandmother moved in with me for the last stretch of her good days. We rented a small place out west, the two of us, in a town near Santa Fe, where the light comes down sideways in the evening and turns the whole sky the color of a peach. I left the night shifts behind and took daytime work at a clinic. She sat on the little patio in the mornings with her coffee and told me about the textile mill and the day she met my grandfather, the same 3 stories, and I never once told her I'd heard them before. My brother visits now. He flew out twice last year. We've gotten better at knowing what to say to each other. The night before he left the first time, he asked me if I was angry at him for staying quiet for so long, and I told him the truth, which was that I'd stopped keeping that particular ledger because the only name on it I was responsible for was my own. My grandmother passed last spring, in her sleep, in the room down the hall, in a bed I'd warmed with a heating pad the way she liked. I was holding her hand. After all those years of holding strangers' hands at the end, I got to hold hers. I think about that a lot. I think she got to leave knowing exactly who stayed. I kept the house, in the end. Not because I wanted it, because she wanted me to have it, and after everything, I finally let myself be given something instead of just giving. I sold it and put the money toward the little place out west. So in a way, she's still here, in the walls, in the peach-colored light. I wrote one thing in my journal the week after the funeral, and I'll leave you with it, because it's the truest thing the whole mess taught me. For 31 years, I thought being the dependable one meant I'd earned a place at the table. But you can't earn your way into a family that's already decided your staff. The ones who love you don't seat you by the kitchen door. They don't tell your grandmother you're gone. They don't put your name on a felony and trust you not to read it. And if you're sitting there right now recognizing too much of your own life and mine, recognizing the way you keep paying, keep covering, keep telling yourself the next time will be the time they finally see you, then hear this from someone who paid for the whole party and got seated with the help. You are not difficult and you are not too much, and you were never the problem. You were just the easiest one to use until you decided to stop being easy. Walking away from people who share your blood is one of the loneliest things a person can do. It is also, sometimes, the only door left that opens outward. I walked through mine, and on the other side there was an old woman by a window in the evening light, and she knew my name, and that turned out to be the whole inheritance I ever needed.